We're about good to go. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the predictions in responsible gambling for 2024. My name is Niamh Gallagher, Marketing Manager here at Mindway AI. We thought it would be a great idea just to kick off the new year to basically highlight what might be to come in the realm of RG and the exploration of imminent trends that could drastically shape the RG sphere in 2024. So we do have an excellent panel lined up for you today. So just for ease, I will hand over to the panelists to introduce yourselves alphabetically. So start with you, Brianne, then move on to Dan, Mike, and Rasmus.
Good morning, everybody from Washington, D.C. My name is Brianne Shawal. I've been in the problem and responsible gambling space now for 11 years here in the U.S. My focus has very much been about driving robust policy here in the U.S. and across the globe, looking to enhance things such as research, prevention, treatment, and recovery services from gambling addiction. And I'm looking forward to a great discussion today. Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Mike de Graaf. I'm the co-founder and Chief Compliance Officer at BetComply. We are a compliance consultancy firm specializing in regulatory and technical compliance as well as legal services. We can know my company or myself from the license applications that we did throughout Europe and the States. And we advise on compliance frameworks throughout the globe. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Spencer of Epic Global Solutions, Director of Safer Gambling. We're a gambling harm prevention company working all over the world with clients from the gambling industry and also the professional sport world and any other industry where gambling harm can exist. Mainly, we're made up of industry experts and those who are reformed problem gamblers themselves, of which I have that lived experience in recovery for 6 years.
Thanks, Dan.
Hi everyone, I'm Rasmus Kjærgaard and I'm the CEO of Mindway AI. For the ones who do not know us at Mindway AI, we are a detection solution provider company providing risk and detection of gambling behavior solutions for gambling operators. Currently, we have software running in 37 countries on 4 continents, and our game scanner AI algorithm combined with psychologist assessment solution is monitoring roughly 7.7 million active players a month at this point in time. I'm also very happy for all of you to have joined, and thank you very much for signing up for this, and we will do our utmost to do a great webinar. Over to you, Niamh.
Thanks, Rasmus. Okay, so thank you, of course, obviously to all panelists for joining. Just before we do get started, so just to let you know, the session will be recorded, so we'll be sharing it afterwards. But please do get involved at any stage if you'd like to comment or ask a question throughout the webinar and also at the end as well. So first off, when everyone signed up, you were asked to send over predictions for the year ahead. So thank you for doing that. We've collated this information and comments basically to kick off the discussion. So as you can imagine, the insights were quite broad and varied. So I'll start with sharing my screen just to go through what were the most common responses and go to the panel for discussion. So 1 second while I do this. Okay, perfect. So I don't think there are any huge surprises here when you can see what comes out on top for the surveys in regards to stricter regulations. I'll go in a second to some of the comments that we received in regards to this, but it's just really to show an overall kind of survey or chart basically of the top responses that we got. Other is a varied bag of different topics that people think will come to the floor this year. The next is application and advances in AI, customer service and duty of care from operators, innovative RG tech, which can also obviously fit into the AI discussion, and increased focus on affordability, continuing on obviously from what has happened before. And then we'll look at RG in specific markets that have come up as areas of interest, industry collaboration, and then automated and real-time interventions as well. So I'll just move on to just some feedback and some of the comments as mentioned here in regards to those top kind of topics that we've seen come up in the survey. So with stricter regulations, I won't go through all of these because you can see them all yourselves. And as we said, this is more of a discussion rather than a presentation. So just to kick off, Mike, I'll go to you first. One of the areas in regards to regulation is, you work in the Netherlands market, and in-house development is always a topic of interest that comes up, and staying in line with new regulations. Can you give some insight on how, this might be a challenge for operators, or what might be the right way to do it in regards to resources?
Yeah, happy to do so. So I'll speak from my main point of reference, which is the Netherlands, because I think it's a very interesting market in terms of this subject. So what we are seeing, especially in newly regulated markets like the Netherlands, is that based on public fallout or political developments, you see very swift changes in regulation where the restrictions become more heavier. Now, we have a very good example here in the Netherlands right now, where the minister is proposing new restrictions that include, for example, interventions or actions based on indicators within 1 hour. So players shows a sign, you have to action within an hour. And that's part of the proposal. But if that comes into effect as of likely April 1st. Now, if you are in a scenario where a lot of operators are, where you have rule-based logic, you're doing SQL reports based on daily or every few hours, and you have analysts analyzing those triggers and then actioning the interventions, you will never make it on time if you have to do it within the hour, right? So you're gonna have to solve that by either staffing up like crazy, so you have enough people sitting there analyzing and doing the intervention so you can tackle all those alerts and within an hour, or you have to implement an algorithm or solution that can do that on an automated base. Now, if the proposal is done right now and it comes into effect in April 1st, you still have to develop real-time interventions like this, then chances are you will not make that on time. And if you are able to implement such a thing into 2 months, then do let me know, because I look for tech people like that, because that's crazy. That's crazy fast. But let's be fair, that's very difficult to do, right? And these are developments that come out of public fallout because of court cases or media cases and or political developments. Now, the public and the politics, they don't care much about how fast you can develop. They like, hey, we decide this is now the new standard, so you have to abide by the new standard. This is the date, and that's it. So this is a problem that is being discussed internally with a lot of companies. How are we going to solve this? Should we be developing already, even though it's not confirmed? Because if it's confirmed and the time frame is even shorter, we are even less likely to succeed. Or you have to go through a third-party solution that can actually implement this within those 10, 12-week time frame that you have. But that is, even then, it might be a challenge, right? Because if I speak from the Netherlands, if it becomes mandatory, it will become mandatory for all 20+ licensees. And there's not many solutions out there. So this is a challenge that we're seeing, where the timeframes are getting shorter while the restrictions are getting heavier, sometimes even unrealistic.
Can I add, Neve, that the way I see it, I completely agree in terms of the timeline, Mike. In this particular case, we are following it very closely, because in principle, if we can have the data fast enough from the platform, our algorithm is and the game scanner solution is ready to comply with the amendment to the Dutch regulation. But even for us, who have a solution already developed, ready to deploy from us. Our standard timeline is normally those 12 weeks, kind of, which is in normal settings quite fast. But when you have such a pressure like this, it's, in my opinion, also too fast in terms of the opportunity to deploy. And on another note, when it comes to following through the regulation, imagine a Dutch regulator who also have a license in Germany. You have another way, another new regulation coming into force exactly on the same date if you're a sports operator in Germany. And then you can continue at each and every jurisdiction. And that is why we see an increasing challenge on the operator side in terms of allocating developer resources, because most developers, internal developers at operators are compliance and RG departments are in competition with the business development. And unfortunately, quite often, developer resources are then allocated elsewhere than on adding compliance and then what is happening there. So definitely there's an opportunity also into that, because in the specific case, we have already customers live with our game scanner in the Dutch market. So obviously we have to we change it, amend it, the solution anyway to comply, of course, also at the deadline. So that's definitely a challenge of in-house development, and then I don't want to mention the basics and benefits of algorithms. I guess I will get an opportunity to that later on in this webinar.
Yeah, great. We can come back to that. One of the other areas that I wanted to touch on with you, Dan, was just some of the insights here about the upcoming changes in regulation in the UK. The pre-panel call, you mentioned, how this might affect the white paper and also the levy as well. Do you mind giving us a bit of information on how you see that panning out?
Yeah, I think probably my top prediction for this year will be that we will see some delays to those changes in the UK regulation, both from the white paper point of view, the statutory levy point of view. I think that there's two huge moving parts in that. One being the resource requirement for the UK regulator. I think we had that called out as soon as the white paper talked about the number of consultations that was going to happen. We saw a massive onboarding from the UK regulator. That's going to take some time to settle, and I think resource is going to be a huge challenge for them this year. The other big moving part will be the general election that we anticipate happening in 2024, and if it does, I think it could really throw a spanner in the works in terms of statutory levy and getting that across the line. This is a question I've asked to DCMS this year, and of course they can't predict what's going to happen in terms of a general election even taking place, let alone the outcome. But their ambition is to get all this over the line before that happens, if it does happen, which would be great to see. But I think those two moving parts, and if you look back at the history of white paper and the consultations, there's been delays all the way through with changes of ministry positions. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that. And I think anything we can do to kind of avoid that and hurry it up would be great. The consultations seem to be going well so far, but there's just so many of them as we head in towards kind of Q2 when we look to see some of these changes. I think stricter regulations being the number one prediction of the people that have attended today is interesting, because personally I don't see any surprises happening this year, certainly in the UK. When I spoke to Andrew Rhodes shortly after the white paper announcement last summer, he definitely said that they wouldn't be focusing on anything outside of that remit, that mandate that they have. So I think what we'll see will be what was in the white paper, what becomes of the consultations. I don't think there'll be a lot of changes there. So are we going to shake up the world of regulation this year in the UK? I don't think so. I think what we will see, and you can see it on the slide here, MGA starting to conduct more RG audits. I think the UK last year, pretty much every major operator received a fine of some sorts. Prediction number one for me, that should be on that chart, is we will continue to see fines this year in UK facing operators. And we got a bit of a spoiler of that yesterday as GameSys received their £6 million fine. And I think what I take from that fine, and also the ones that we saw at the back end of last year, is that even though we have stricter regulation, we have better capability to detect customers and risk in those customers. This is all about how it feeds through to action that directly affects your customers. You know, if we do still have operators that are allowing people to go through £15,000 without an interaction, or the interaction isn't good enough, then the detection systems largely don't have an impact. So we need to see that the detection systems feed through to great teams that are well trained, confident in doing their job. They know what they've got to do. They can react to these kind of changing regulations and expectations. Because now we're seeing from that GameSys fine yesterday, 15,000 in 6 months. They had a safer gambling interaction. The interaction was not good enough. So for me, that's the big missing link in all of this.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Go ahead, Robin.
Completely agree. We don't change anything if we don't use what can be provided from the detection side, definitely. And our objectives in that is to support the teams in the best way possible with the most accurate, more individualized, earlier detection, but also decision-making support in actually which decisions to take in terms of intervention, and then from there, as you said, then get them trained to do it and to reach out to customers. But it has to also start with the recognition that they also will do it, right?
One of the topics that came up was about marketing for under 18s. And Brianna, I wanted to go to you because actually we had another comment come in, and it was a prediction for increased intervention at high school or college level and in the US in general, especially as there's, you know, a lot of focus on streaming platforms. What's your take on this, or what's your kind of prediction for this area in regards to the US?
I think it's a great comment, and actually 17 minutes in, this webinar very much has already accurately captured what my day-to-day life is, discussing RG policy across the globe. When we juxtapose the US to other markets, it's a very different landscape, right? You're all talking about stricter regulations, fines, public pressure, the policymakers feeling all of that. You have to remember, here in the US, our federal government doesn't even recognize gambling addiction. Many states that have legalized sports betting, about 20% of them didn't even account for problem gambling at the time of legalization. So my big prediction for 2024 is that this is going to be the year that problem gambling really starts to arise, both in the policymakers' spheres, as well as public pressure through mainstream media pieces, as Mike pointed out. It is an election year, so I don't anticipate a lot of gaming expansion, right? There's a lot of concern from policymakers. They can't be seen to vote for gaming in an election year. And a big component of this is underage, talking about the implications for the youth population, what this means for access, what kind of protections do and do not exist. But the truth of the matter is, by and large, the US market is still woefully uneducated about how this market even operates. And so we are just beginning to pull back the onion layers. We are a far cry away from increased regulations. I've only got 2 jurisdictions that fine the industry for failures around RG. We're in a very different position than the rest of you right now.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, and I think we'll come back to it a little bit later in the discussion when we're talking about different markets. Just one of the other things I wanted to touch on here before we moved on was about the standardization of the markers of harm. So Rasmus, just going back to you, so Mindway has been involved with EGBA's European standard markers of harm for online gambling. Can you give a bit of insight into how you see this working and what is needed for its success going forward?
Yeah, so the initiative was initiated about standardizing markers of harm was initiated by EGBA, but it's now moved into the European standardization body of CEN. That works the way that each member of the project is kind of voting on their national vote as an EU member state, and so we are on the Danish vote together with the Danish Gambling Commission and a lot of other, mainly scientists and gambling commissions are around. We are accompanied by one other solution provider. And the reason why we and led by I took the decision to be part of this project was that I think there is a significant need in the industry as a general to standardize, to have minimum standards, because also when we look into how detection is done and coming back to in-house development as well, there's definitely different standards around when it comes to how detection is done, how detection is not done, how markers are set, how markers can be changed under influence, and definitely we as one of the companies trying to be a significant voice in this part of the industry will like to advocate for standardization, higher standards on what is detected to give the RG teams better opportunity to intervene in the right way, but for the record, only on the customers who show signs of problem in their gambling behavior, not on the 97, 98% or more of the customers who don't. So that goes both ways, in my opinion. But even more so, we would be relevantly interested into moving even further into maybe even licensing certification of this in specific jurisdictions. And we see already movements in that directions in different parts of the world.
Thanks for that, Rasmus. Dan, I'm just going to go back to you just about the single customer review trial. It's suggested here that there might be a working model this year. I guess, based on what you've said already, this is still kind of something that might be up in the air, or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, a total prediction, this one. I don't know any more than what's in the public domain, but we do know that GAM Protect is a system that has been worked on for the last few years now, championed by the Betting and Gaming Council. I think the last update we had on it was July 23, where the IOC approved the data sharing between operators. So as far as I'm aware, we have a working model. I think when I was looking towards the next 12 months about what we may or may not see, I think if we've got a working model and it's out there and the restrictions have been removed, then we could see great movement in this around 2024. There seems to be very limited barriers in the way of that now. I think it will come down to what the results show and whether the operators want to do this. I think it's a really good example, Neve, of an initiative that has been taken by the operators to run themselves. I think we could very easily just sit around and wait for a regulator to tell us we have to have a single customer view. I mean, the operators aren't going to like it, the public aren't going to like it. But in this way, with what the Betting and Gaming Council have done and taken the initiative to start this, I think it sets a really good example of things we can do all around the world, really. And I think that really takes me looking at my US clients, where I think greater collaboration will be seen this year in 2024. I think as the market settles down now and we look to build a sustainable market going forward, I think RG being led by the operators can only be a good thing. If you're a large tier one operator, you want to stay ahead of regulation. And I think if you're constantly catching up to what states are mandating, you're going to be on the back foot commercially as well. So I think GAM Protect shows a really good example of how this can happen. There'll be others if I think about it, but just thinking towards this 12 months about what we may or may not see, I think in the UK, certainly we've got a white paper that tells us what we're going to see. As I said, I don't think we'll see very many changes to that. Elsewhere across Europe and the rest of the world, I think examples like GAM Protect, I'd love to see more of that.
Yeah, I think Mike, you had mentioned. Oh, sorry, Brian, you go.
That's okay. I was just going to say that, from a US standpoint, where gambling is regulated on a state-by-state basis, there's real value in seeing a single customer view. But the reality is, from a data privacy standpoint, this is very worrisome for a lot of Americans and American operators. This is very much going to be an instance where we wait and we see how it shakes out and unfolds in the international market. Even then, even in preliminary discussions here in the US, there's been a lot of reticence. We only have one state right now, that being New Jersey, that even dictates explicitly what type of markers of harm are to be monitored and intervened with. And we are definitely not talking an hour for interventions. It could be the next day. It could be just wait and see, right? We have a lot of opportunity and a lot of growing that we need to do. But this has arisen in 2023 as something that we are watching here. But I do believe that, as Dan said, there's going to have to be a lot of self-driven initiatives as our regulations and legislation very much lags significantly behind.
Yeah, again, so bringing it back to the operator to drive on. Just conscious of time, but Mike, I was going to ask you because you'd mentioned this as well about in regards to the Netherlands and sharing of data, but also wanted to move on what you mentioned about the court refunds. If you wouldn't mind going into a bit more detail about this.
Yeah, sure. Because that is part of the predictions that I have for this year, is that we will see more of them. Now, what do I mean with these court cases? Most of the attendees might have seen one or two of them, but there is a bit of a trend going on in European countries where markets that have been regulated are now experiencing court cases for players in pre-regulation period. So when the operators were there under gray market circumstances, for example, where the refunds are being granted by the judge. Now, I was in terms of iGaming, I was born and raised in the UK market, and one thing I very much noticed there is that when a case of a certain kind gets granted, more of the similar cases will follow very shortly, because people will think, oh, I have a case like that, I had a case like that, and then they will go back. There will be more cases coming. Now, I have a lot of discussions about this with my clients on what I think on it. And there's sometimes a bit of panic, even like, hey, but we thought we were doing okay. We were abiding, but apparently, in looking back, we were not. Now, what I predict will happen is there will be more court cases like this, especially in Netherlands, Germany, and Sweden, where recent hearings have been held, and media will love this. Now, currently, we're seeing this in industry publications, but I do predict that it will reach mainstream media 1 or 2 or 3 cases in 2024, because it is a hot topic in terms of politics, and a court case like this, especially if the amount is high, is, let's say, juice for media. So I think it will happen.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, Mike, that you mentioned about the negative press, because that did come up as a separate topic for a few people, which obviously comes under stricter regulations as well. So yeah, thanks for that. Just moving on, just conscious of time here. So looking at next kind of 2 areas, which are, I suppose, intertwined, would be increased applications and advances in AI, but also increased automated and real-time interactions. So some of the comments that we've had here was about tapping into real-time behavior for operators to be more proactive rather than reactive to customer risk patterns, and having deeper evaluations of interactions, more personalized approaches and tailored approaches to the players. And obviously, the growth of AI in terms of different applications that it has. Who'd like to come in on this just to kind of elaborate a little bit or give a prediction on this?
I can open real quick on it, because what I'm seeing in terms of C-level meetings, let's say, is that they are worried and don't understand the AI fully. So from a commercial point of view, you want to know, what do I need to abide by? Is it really mandatory? And the stuff that I'm implementing, is this helping the business or is this hurting the business? Because, and for them to understand the AI algorithms behind it, most tech people don't even understand it. So the main objective for providers or compliance personnel would be to have it explainable to the C-level what is happening in terms of these algorithms and how it's working, and whether it's indeed really mandatory. Because from a commercial point of view, if they don't fully understand why it's happening, their immediate thought will be, we will be restricting the players that we should not be restricting. So an overkill in terms of compliance, and that's where you get hesitance from the commercial point of the business.
If I can come in on that, I think that what we will see this year and in coming years is a growing trust in AI detection methods. I think a lot of the work that myself and my team have done over the last 2 years, and we've got upcoming projects on this all over the world this year, is going in and assuring that these AI systems are doing the job that they are supposed to do. And that's why we're partnered with Mindway. We share a lot of our clients, and we'll go in and do manual checks. We'll use our focus group. We've got 26 people in our organization that are in recovery from gambling related harm, and we'll go through and we'll pick out those customers and make sure that we're doing exactly what you said, Mike, that we are restricting the customers that we should do. And like Rasmus said earlier, we're affecting the 1 or 2% and leaving the 98% alone. So I think that always starts at board level. We'll go in and we'll present at board level and then go in and do our manual checks and produce our reports. And, hopefully that kind of builds some trust within the organization that we are picking out the right people. And I think the risk to that is, if you don't trust the system, even if you have it, and I won't name any names, but I know clients of mine, particularly in America, where their RG systems don't kick in unless that it's driven by the customer, unless the customer's made a complaint or taken some kind of legal action or something. When they have these systems that can get there before things go wrong, and all that's missing is that kind of trust in the system that it is doing the right thing and it is commercially a long-term gain, and short-term pain, rather than the other way around.
Can I add here? Most of what you said, Mike, is exactly the reason why, or one of the reasons why we invented the approach we built into the algorithm of Game Scanner, where we combine machine learning algorithms with human psychologist assessments, because we wanted to do the detection of a gambling behavior more thoroughly and more individualized. And also we wanted to develop a system that would be explainable for everybody who uses it, and everybody who would at C-level or any other level be part of the decision to start deploying it. And on the other hand, then also provide operators with earlier more individualized detection on each and every player. So imagine we have customers who have millions of active players a day in one jurisdiction, and every morning they have a new automated psychologist-based assessment tested by GLI on the accuracy as well, giving quite sophisticated, in-depth opportunity. The challenge, seen from my perspective, as providing such a sophisticated solution, is that decision makers are not necessarily, or decision groups at operators are not necessarily looking into detail exactly what is detected underneath the motor helmet. What are the markers? How many markers are there? We roughly detect 150 data points per player per day, for instance, underneath what we present in an analytics view. And a lot of other factors are not necessarily clarified, because even in a clarification process, it's quite complex. And very often I think of that people say, oh, we just need to deploy some AI and everything is good. there's also rubbish AI out there. There's also, and we meet it and see it also, yeah, based on basically more simple foundations. So there is a lot of variety. It's not easy, but I think that utilizing AI in big data analysis and trying to solve the difficult task of finding individual human behaviors in gambling behaviors is definitely a way to crack this nut.
I feel like if I could jump in, I think for 2024, a priority for all of those invested in responsible gaming, it has to be about filling this educational gap. I didn't necessarily see it as mistrust, as not being informed. I think in the last 5 years, responsible gaming very much went from checking a compliance box or a necessary evil with a little bit of resistance to this is the way we're going to stave off more regulations or burdensome, ineffective requirements for operation to is this preventing growth of my business and preventing play? And so as we can increase an understanding and appreciation that this is here to create the safest, most sustainable customer base instead of preventing growth of the business, I think that's really where this evolution needs to go in the next 12 months. If we don't fill this educational gap, there's going to become that very friction-based industry regulatory relationship again, because regulators and policymakers are going to start feeling that increasing need to continue to push for these type of things, especially because AI drives market participation so much. So why is it that there's this AI lag in the prevention RG space? So, for me, it's about continuing to be persistent in pushing and advocating and educating everybody who has an interest in this world, because if we can come together on this, I think it benefits, frankly, everyone.
Yeah, so a lot to be kind of discussed in the way of education for player protection rather than player prevention. So just moving on, because we have still a lot more to get through. So we discussed some of these other topics here at the top in regards to real-time interventions, but I suppose it feeds into the next one, which is quite a big topic about better customer service and duty of care from operators, which we've already touched on a little bit, but I'd like to go into a bit more detail in regards to how operators can maybe take a bit more kind of onus to do this and to have more of a focus on RG. And this did come up a lot. Is there anyone who'd like to make any comments on this?
I can go. So with the approach we have in Game Scanner, we see quite often, or the model quite often detects signs of something that may evolve later on to problematic gambling behavior, even as early as it's considered green or at very low risk. And if one could think of also more sophisticated software that helps operators to handle this automatically, obviously not manually at that point in time. So some way reaching out in the channels where the customers are, the gambling platform or elsewhere, in a way that will be seen as not intervention, but more carrying out customer service, because I'm a provider of a service to you, dear customer, and I really care that I see this in your behavior. And of course, that has to be balanced for it not to be too intrusive, but at least to have the opportunity in a tech stack at an operator to do so, I would think could be of interest of operators in some jurisdictions, at least.
Yeah, one of the points here I thought was quite interesting was about RG measures at the point of sign up. I'm wondering what that could look like. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, it could be a self-test based as a card game, for instance.
Good idea. Brianne, you look like you're about to say something.
I mean, this is definitely a top wish list of mine. I don't know if I'll see it in the US in 2024, right? But I often talk about normalizing RG features instead of unintentionally or subconsciously indicating that they're only for people with a problem, right? I often talk about how RG is for everyone to prevent problems, but very much, at least here in the US and other jurisdictions, we treat these tools as something that you only engage with when you have a problem. And how many of our customers are in a position to say, oh, hey, that's for me, I have a problem, right? And so I often have advised my clients across the globe to offer these type of tools at the time of sign up. Just that very basic notion that everybody does this helps break the shame and stigma that is still deeply ingrained in the way that customers view and participate with RG tools. Again, this is a huge wish list of mine. I don't forecast 2024 is going to see a huge migration, at least in the US, to offer the kind of a sign up. I do think this is going to be an item that is discussed in those RG groups that are industry led to try and address this issue. I think we're a couple years away, but one I'm very excited to see come to fruition.
Yeah, one of the things that I think will need to happen in order for that to happen is that we minimize the other steps of the registration or automate it. Because one of the big things that operators are debating about is the drop-off rate, right? Every click you add to the registration flow increases the drop-off rate of the players, and that's that. So if we see more automated verification or anything that reduces the amount of clicks on the other side of the registration flow, that enables to add in other things like the RG measures into the registration flow. Because that is, as soon as because I love that idea, and it should and it will help. But I know that if I propose it right now, they will say, but how many clicks does that add? And how is that going to affect my business on the registration flow? But we are seeing more and more automated identification and verification measures, for example, and I think we have a lot of brilliant minds in the industry that can think of a good solution where you engage the player into these things during registration without increasing the drop-off rate too much.
I think that's a great point, Mike. I hear it all the time when I bring it up. Oh, but that's going to create more friction. And it's a real consideration here, right? But as tech evolves in other aspects of the industry, I just would hate to see RG get left behind. So again, back to that filling the educational gap, where we can be putting this top of mind. It may not happen in the next 12, 24 months, but who knows what 36 months and beyond bring about.
I think that comes down to understanding the number one focus in the market, and certainly for North America, the number one focus is customer acquisition, right? So if you're not supporting customer acquisition, then we're not going to get changes through. And I think that background protection methods like AI interventions, like what Mindway do, non-friction based interactions is going to be the way to go. So I think it's just looking at the usage cases for that. I think looking at everything else on this slide, like I said, very little surprises, I think, this year coming. I'd hate to be proven wrong in that. I think we know where we're heading this year. The big unknown for me is Latin America, it's South America. You know, what's going to happen with Brazil? That's the big moving piece for me in the RG space. And I'd like to think that they go the same way as we did with North America, where we were partnered with operators in North America before they'd taken their first bets. You know, we're thinking RG first, and we're certainly having conversations in South America to the same tune.
Yeah, it's an interesting point to make. I remember running an event in LATAM a few years back, and we had a RG roundtable session, and I think there was one person in the room which really reflected the kind of mindset really at the time. So hopefully we're going to see quick changes in those markets in Brazil in particular. Just going on to that topic of RG in specific markets, Brianna, I wanted to come back to you because you're talking about how RG should be for everyone and, you know, the perception in the US. And you mentioned about how this might be an opportunity to where the US might be falling short. With regards to kind of negative PR, what kind of advice would you give kind of to industry stakeholders to be on the front foot, I suppose, with this?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of negative PR even in the next 6 weeks, I have to say. Unfortunately, not the best way to start off the new year, right? My best piece of advice for the industry at large is to not deny that harm does exist. You know, there's a lot of chatter right now about the illegal market versus the legal market. My fear is that as Congress and other policymakers really begin to question what is prom gambling, how is this nascent industry impact prevalence rates, you know, we've got one congressman who has come out and said, well, let's just ban advertising, right? And now, while I don't think this is likely to pass, you know, I was just asked the other day by a mainstream publication, well, he compares it to tobacco. Here in the US, you cannot advertise about tobacco. And the real reason that tobacco isn't advertising or allowed to advertise anymore is that they denied harm, right? They suppressed this information, they denied it. And so my best piece of advice for the industry is to not deny, to accept, to be proactive in addressing it, to be superseding regulations, even when it makes you uncomfortable or fearful it could prevent play. Because the truth of the matter is the sustainability and the long-term prospects are really at stake here. And US policymakers are very prone to react to their constituents. And as the negative PR amplifies, the pressure is going to only increase. And for an industry that's never been regulated at the federal level, and is now looking at an outright ban 5 years into this, I don't think the stakes could be any higher. So engaging with the likes of Mindway and Epic and talking about how to address the harm that exists and not denying it, I believe is going to be the key to success here, because the Achilles heel for the US market is going to be authentic, organic, responsible gaming commitments.
Yes, and similarly for new or recently regulated markets, there's a point here where maybe there's a prediction around that they'll take action sooner. Does anyone see this happening in any specific markets? I know obviously Brazil's mentioned here, but any other ones that you would like to mention where this might happen?
Well, what we're seeing a lot, or what I'm hearing a lot, is that markets learn from each other, they say, but then they don't, or seemingly don't. So I do get where this point is coming from, where you will see new markets or intending to regulate markets, like for example Finland, if they ever regulate, then you might see steps towards there where they say, listen, we're gonna skip a step or two and we're gonna do it immediately instead of trying to wait for the maturity, because you're seeing countries looking at each other in terms of advertising, where the restrictions are becoming too much and then pushing into illegal market. But you also see the backlash of not having clear defined RG restrictions in new markets, and that might come into new markets at the start. I see that happening. Yeah.
Let me add that I completely agree with you, Brianne, and we see that also the same dynamics in more mature and regulated market over here on the European side of the pond. What we have seen the last year, and that is likely going to continue in 2024, is an increasing number of regulators being interested in what we do. And that is also on both sides of the pond. In the past, they were reluctant to talk to us because they thought they would then kind of promote what we do and what we provide. Now they are interested to learn, which potentially also tells me that there might have been a lack of understanding on algorithmic based detection and monitoring of player behavior and player risk. So there's also an educational piece to do there for guys like us, and we see various conversations evolve, which will then potentially lead into maybe more aligned, more standardization, as mentioned earlier, and hopefully mitigating what you say here, Mike.
I think as markets mature, it will become less about following the journey that more mature markets have trodden. It's been more about kind of learning those lessons along the way. And I think the big lesson for me is that we've moved away from a 2 touch point journey for responsible gambling. Those 2 touch points being on sign up and then the action that's made at the end when the harm is detected. And I think what these recent fines in the UK certainly show is that we need multiple touch points along that way. Responsible gambling is really about following that journey and taking care of that customer along that way. So I think any detection methods you've got will help, but ultimately it will come down to the actions you've taken at the key points in that customer's journey.
Absolutely
Okay,
agree.
Yeah, it leads into the next slide here, what you mentioned, Rasmus, about regulators looking into data analysis system and having more standardized and sophisticated approach. You can see some other things that are mentioned here about integration of self-exclusion databases, prediction models, and then going back to AI and machine learning as well in regards to innovation for RG tech and solutions. That has come up as a topic to discuss. Does anyone see anything else that might come to the forefront this year?
No, I do see the collaboration with gambling addiction treatment providers, for example. I see that a lot. Experts from experience, or former gambling addicts, but also addiction care experts, educational experts, psychologists. You do see that more regulators are even mandating the collaboration or looking and pushing for it. And I think the only reluctancy that I see on the other side is that there's a reluctancy from the healthcare field to engage with the industry. That's where we see a lot of friction. So, for example, in the Netherlands, it is baked in the regulation that you have to collaborate with addiction care experts and experts from experience. Now, most applicants were even struggling to find a party that wanted to work with them because they all were like, no, we don't talk with the industry. But you do see more of a need that this needs to happen. So I do see more of this coming shortly on us.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I thought one of the other interesting things mentioned here was about the cross-industry collaboration. I know from my background in editorial, you'd always try to go and get this in regards to, let's say, the alcohol industry, but there was that pushback as well, where it's like they don't want to be associated, where there are potential learnings across the board on both sides in regards to negative PR and that kind of thing and safeguarding. So I thought that was another quite interesting topic that was raised here. In regards to collaborations, does anyone see any other kind of ones that might, come to the forefront this year?
I think collaborating with society. Sorry, Brianne, did I just jump over you?
Oh, please.
I think I'll be very quick. I think collaboration with society is probably one that's missing on here as well. And I think that when we look at preventing gambling related harm, it's not just about clearing your own doorstep. It really is about getting together and making sure that, let's face it, the reason you get heat from regulators is because the harm exists and it's growing, right? So how do you prevent that? And we're certainly doing more with operators to fund things like schools programs where we'll go in and talk to kids as they kind of reach maturity and head towards potentially gambling for the first time. Those that are already gambling, working in high risk industries such as professional sport. I think anytime that an operator can help with that collaboration and risk harm growing, then it will kind of fend off at the forefront of oncoming stricter regulation in the future.
Thanks, Dan. Brianne, did you want to?
So the one that's a bit of an anomaly here for the US, and like I said, I work across the globe, and something I've been so impressed to see from the European side is kind of the separation between sports, teams, leagues, and gambling, right? There's becoming this ever increasing gap. Where here in the US, it's very different. I did an interview just last night with someone in North Carolina, where actually all market access is being driven by partnerships with a professional sports team. And so while the rest of the globe is talking about separating some long existing relationships and collaboration. Here in the US, we're actually seeing teams and sporting leagues take an ever increasing role with at least in our mobile sports markets. In that same vein, well, yes, that carries increased risks, and many of us in our prevention and reduction are thinking about how this plays out. The truth is, several of those leagues and teams have been very aggressive right from the starting gate talking about RG. You saw the leagues form a responsible gaming collaborative. Several have joined the American Gaming Associations, have a game plan. So from my perspective here across the pond, I actually see an opportunity here for the leagues and teams to join in the quest to educate and normalize responsible gaming. Now, stay tuned, right, everybody? I'm not sure if we're going to not suffer the same fate as the rest of you 20 years from now, but it is something that I am pleased to see them using their platform to talk about the ever important RG.
Okay, thanks, Brianne. Just a reminder to attendees, we're about to wrap up soon, but if anyone has any questions, please do put them in the chat, and we'll go to the panel for a comment. But just looking at the last section here, again, I don't think there's any surprise where one of the topics is about an escalated focus on affordability. Maybe I'll go back to you, Brianne, about the US perspective on it. Any comments?
You know, look, we just had one of our first very high profile cases, comes out of Florida. An individual had, wagered a lot of money. It happened to be in fantasy, but it was a big number, right? $22 million. How can someone afford that? I don't forecast what I know about US law and regulation that will end up having ever a discussion about affordability the way, say, the UK is right now. It's a very, very difficult concept. But that being said, this is top of mind for, I would say, at least half of the US regulators that have been overseeing mobile betting in the last few years. As the scenarios and instances and unfortunate harm that starts to come out in the press, this will ever increasingly become a topic that gets debated. Again, it is really difficult to imagine a scenario where we end up with affordability in the way the UK is talking about affordability checks. Nonetheless, this to me is one of the top industry opportunities to go in and collaborate and bring a solution to the regulatory landscape. This is one of those calls to action that I say to all my industry clients. Yes, it might make you uncomfortable. Yes, I know you're worried about the preventative of play, but affordability is a huge component to effective responsible gaming, and it has to be top of mind. So affordability here in the US will look different, but it is going to continue to arise through all the bad press that I think's in the near short-term future going to come down the pipeline.
Okay, thanks, Brianne. Just before we finish, if I could just go to each of the panelists, just to give a quick fire, if you had to pick one top prediction for the year ahead, what would it be? I'll start with you, Rasmus.
Well, I would say more developments on more sophisticated AI solutions. That's what we do, and we'll definitely continuing growing and doing so for 2024. We have a lot of things in our pipeline and a lot of thoughts of where we can in which directions we can take this. So that will be my top prediction for the next year.
Thank you. And Mike, over to you.
Yeah, so I think the main issue that operators will be facing is the time to develop, and because it's not just developing of a tool. A lot of jurisdictions also then trigger platform recertification and all the things related to it. So I do see a lot of issues there with timelines. Now that is something that my company and some of the companies here also support with. But that I see as a major issue, because speaking from past experiences, this will become a rush to market, and then that can create its own issues.
Thanks, Mike. And Dan, your top prediction 2024?
We'll carry on seeing the fines from the regulators throughout this year. We're not done with legacy harm yet. I think we still need to patch up the holes in the RG net. Regulators are still picking easy fruit, low-hanging fruit right now. We need to make sure all our back office decisions has real tangible change on the front lines of the touch points with the customers.
Thanks, Dan. And Brianne?
Two predictions for the US. The first is that the industry gets serious about collaborating and pushing RG forward. And I think this is going to be the year for problem gambling in the US. There's going to be a lot of press. I think policymakers are going to start to take note. I think there's going to be some big announcements coming out of Congress in the States. I've been talking about this for a long time before it was the buzzword. And I think this is going to be the year it really starts to take hold, and it's very exciting.
Thanks, Brianne. Okay, so that leads us to the end of the webinar. So I'd like to firstly thank all of our panelists for joining. So thank you, Brianne, Rasmus, Dan, and Mike. We are recording the webinar, as I said, so we'll be sharing it afterwards. But if you do have any additional questions or would like to get in touch with any of the panelists, you can contact us at contact@mindway.ai. Of course, we'll be at ICE. We'll be in the Consumer Protection Zone booth in N1 CP12. I'm sure some of the other panelists will be there too. So we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Lee.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.